Hey, welcome back to The Standard. My name is Chance Brown. I'm going to be your host today, and I am excited to welcome our guest. His name is Trevin Oberkrom. He is the COO of my brokerage here, CB&A Realtors. He is also the team lead at Given Realty Group. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about today as we get going is how we get shit done, like how we actually get things completed. And I figured, what better person than the person I trust with the operations of my brokerage than to bring on and talk about actually getting things done. But before we do that, Trevin, say hello to everybody and tell them a little bit about you, kind of how you got into real estate and what brought you here.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be here. I am actually a second generation realtor. My parents were both in real estate when I was a kid. My dad started out in residential real estate, kind of like we are, in the Kansas City area, and shortly after got into the development side and just kind of dominoed from there. Ended up moving from Kansas City into Denver and basically just doing the same thing, rinse and repeat. And my mom got into it as well, handled the sales side after they got the houses built, and just kind of did a teamwork situation from there. And I tried to avoid it with all costs, just doing my own thing as I came through and started growing up. And God's got other plans. Here I am. So
that's right. So, and actually, so tell everybody what you did immediately before you did real estate, because it's a cool story. And for the purposes of like doing video and doing things, it just shows that, like, you know, you don't have to have a professional background to do it, but, you know, having a few little pointers helps, right?
Absolutely. So for the 7 years before I got into real estate, I was working in the television production world. I was filming and producing for the Outdoor Channel and the Sportsman's Channel. We traveled all over the U.S., a little bit in Mexico, doing everything from hunting stuff to as well as like product and company-wide marketing pieces and things like that. I did that for 7 years, produced our own show for 2 towards the tail end of it. And as we all know, video streaming has really
changed the world.
And so I decided that I was going to kind of get ahead of the switching and ahead of the changes. And my mom and my wife both were like, you know what you're supposed to be doing. And I was like, no, it's not happening. And here I am.
So here you are 7 years
later.
Here
I am. Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, welcome to The Standard. So the purpose of The Standard is to try to give everybody sort of a leg up on execution and on building a great business. And one of those things that I think most realtors struggle with is actually getting to the finish line on the to-do list, right? I think there's, you know, my coach likes to say that we're long on ideas, but short on execution.
For sure.
And so what ends up happening is you've got a to-do list and you've got 30 things on it. You've started all 30 and they're all somewhere between 40 and 70% done, and nothing ever really gets finished because we keep getting better ideas and we start on focusing on this and stopping focusing on that and all points in between. And so what I thought today what we could do is just kind of spitball some things on how we actually take a project to completion.
Okay.
So when you have something that you're trying to get done, whether it's in the brokerage, whether it's in your personal business, like where do you start?
For me personally, because I'm so analytical by nature, is I want to understand the entire scenario as best I can. I don't care what you're going to do. You're going to dive into something and you're going to learn different pieces and stuff as you go. But for me, it's to get as much out in the open and understanding of what the end goal is, so then I can kind of reverse engineer where I need to go from there.
Right.
That'll give me kind of a rough idea of timetable for stuff. It'll give me an idea of what to prepare for, what I'm going to need. And that could be realtor related, company related, what have you. I attack it from the same angle.
Yeah.
And that's going to be my target process with everything I'm doing. Is go, okay, here's our end goal. What is it going to take us to get this accomplished? What am I missing? And try and fill the gaps any way that I can so I can get to a finished product.
And so that end goal is that the definition of success, or is that I've got to get something that I can put out to the world, and then we reconfigure if we need to. Like, in the world of startups, is that a minimum viable product?
I would have to say yes from the beginning, because I'm a firm believer that I don't care how long you're doing something or how long you're in an industry, or you're going to get better and you're going to improve over time. So I think it's the famous, you've taught us all since we got started in here is don't get paralysis by analysis. Like, go do something and then figure out how to improve it and expound upon that as the years progress and time does. You're going to get better at everything you do.
Well, and if we know one thing, like, everything's going to change all the time. So as soon as we get something in the can and we say, okay, well, I'm done with that, something in our world changes and we need to go make little adjustments.
For sure.
Which actually, to me, is kind of part of that project management is, okay, if I've got this system or process over here and this over here changes, does this affect that? And if so, do we need to then go back and look at, if, for example, in our universe, if a contract changes, right? So we need to look at that from an education standpoint. We have a ton of video content on contracts that we need to go back in. We need to have explainers out to the agents. Like, there's 3 or 4 trickle down things that happen that we've got to go back in and change because of a little bit of verbiage on a contract document change.
Sure.
Right. So, from that standpoint, I don't know that you're ever really done with most of your projects. And I think, even if it's something that's event based, right? Like, we have our annual awards next week. Every year that has evolved.
For sure.
Right. And so I think having a record of what you're doing makes a lot of sense so that you can go back and say, I'm just going to lather, rinse, repeat this process. But this year I want to add this, or this year I want to add that, or whatever that looks like, right?
100%.
So talk about reverse engineering. You mentioned that. I think that that's super important. And the story that I always kind of tell with that is when I first got into management in a former life, I got tasked with a project to see who were the best builders.
Okay.
Right? Were they the builders that were super customer centric and were everybody's best friend? Or were they the builders that just went in and did their job and went home? And what we learned very quickly on in that analysis was, and it was kind of a surprise to me, was that the builders who went in and they said, okay, in order for me to make the most money on my bonus, I need to reverse engineer this. And they would say, okay, I need to close this by this date. And then they would go back step by step and say, these are the things that have to happen. Those are the ones that actually got the highest survey ratings, not the ones that were the most friendly and kumbaya. The ones that actually got shit done and did it, said they were going to do something and went out and did it. Those are the ones that they actually had the highest customer satisfaction ratings.
That doesn't surprise me. I mean, being able to follow up with your word is important. I mean, in anything we do.
So walk through for you, you're going through in reverse engineering. What does that look like? And what wrinkle gets thrown into that when you have to delegate? And we could probably do a whole other podcast episode on delegation.
For sure. I mean, first for me, like, let's just say like brokerage wide. If we're working on a project is number one, we've got to set an expectation of when this needs to be completed or when we're trying to have something completed. And depending on what project you're in, you're having to determine really how to eat the elephant bite by bite. Mm-hmm. It's okay, this section's going to take this long, this section's going to take this long. And sometimes you have to get into the project a little bit at first to really learn your time management and learn the real kind of expectation for when you're going to get a section done. And then you can kind of build all those together.
Yeah.
And you often have to attack it that way, especially if you're doing something brand new that's never been started before. You're literally building from scratch. Whereas if you're taking something that has been done and you're trying to make improvements upon that or just certain pieces of it, you can take something and go, okay, it's really just going to make us adjust this or adjust that.
Right.
And those to me are handled kind of differently for the simple fact that from the scratch stuff, your project could be twice as long. I mean, it really could. And the tweaking or improving or trying to make better it's really where you can hone in and make things creative and really kind of put a flair or a touch or a culture on it. And so for me, I have to approach those separately by time as well as a finished end goal, finished product. And that's from like a company perspective. Now, if you're talking about real estate or like running your business, it's maybe a little bit different because a lot of that can be learned completely from scratch.
Yeah. So let's talk about that for a second because you brought that up. So let's say I have never done something before and I'm going to go in and I'm trying something totally brand new, right? And you talked about kind of taking a chunk of it and doing it and just seeing how it goes and seeing what that time looks like and all of that. As somebody who, doesn't hold attention well, and I think I speak for a lot of realtors when I say
Absolutely.
that, is that something you're going to sit down and do all in one chunk?
Man, I can't imagine that you can in a realistic manner, just from the fact that you're going to learn some stuff as you go.
Right.
I mean, like let's use our know and grow stuff that we reworked this past year. There was some of those sections that we were just tweaking a little bit where like the Ninja program, we had to kind of go in and rewrite. So the time frame for those baby projects inside the big project were substantially different.
Right.
We were working together. We were reaching out to other people and gathering information so we could put it all in versus going, okay, we just need to pull this out and kind of reword some things. And so you really have to understand what you're accomplishing. And sometimes you have to break it into baby incremental pieces.
Gotcha. Okay. Because like for me, I'm much better if I can go in and do a couple hours and then walk away from it completely. And sometimes I'll come back and I'll review and I'll make tweaks, or sometimes I just come back and I go next section.
100%.
And so, from that reverse engineering standpoint, it's when can I time block out these sections to really dedicate towards this one thing?
Yep.
Like right now we're working on something and it's really it's a fairly simple project, but it's labor intensive from a layout standpoint. And then once it's laid out, we can send it to our marketing team and they'll actually finish it off for us. But as I go through it, I'm trying to get, what we're trying to get across, which I think is important from a messaging standpoint. If you're a real estate agent and you're trying to message something to a buyer, a seller, another agent, a team member, whatever that looks like. But on the other side, I've got to think about the user experience.
For sure.
And that's tough to balance the point you're trying to get across to what your recipient is going to see and hear. And so I think that walking away sometimes allows me to come back with a different perspective.
I would 100% agree. And there's oftentimes too, when you get into the middle of a project, it leads you down a different path than maybe you kind of had envisioned when you got started. And sometimes that's for a good reason.
Right.
And if you pay attention to that and you track it to where it's going to take you, oftentimes it helps kind of rewrite some of the other processes that you're doing to get you to the finished piece the right way versus trying to force certain elements. So that stepping away is a very crucial piece for.
So let's talk about that. Let's pull the thread on what you were just saying. How does that change when you have to delegate?
So especially when you're talking about a large size project or something, you have to understand your strengths. And I don't care what part of a project you're in, you've got to understand what your strengths are and where you can bring the most to the table. And it's no different than like us in real estate. Maybe some of us aren't the best at writing contracts. So you should have a TC do that for you.
Right.
Stick to doing the selling. Like that's your bread
Even
and
if
butter.
you are good at writing contracts, you should have a TC do that for you.
He's been telling me that for a long time. But it really is. It's understanding going, okay, I can knock this out, but this is something that I don't thrive in. So who could do this in a quicker manner than me and do it well? And you have to be able to separate yourself and not feel like you have to have a death grip of control on every aspect of it.
Right. Like to me, so I think actually TC is a really great example to use on this, right? Because I think for a lot of us, we don't want to give up control of that process because we think it's going to affect the customer experience.
100%.
And I've talked about this before in other medium. But to me, The TC is the easiest thing to give up, even though most agents really struggle with it. And every time I tell them, and then finally they go do it, and they're like, oh shit, I wish I had done that years ago. But the TC is the easiest part because your client doesn't see you sending emails to the title company. They don't care. They don't know that happens unless you're talking about it, which is, again, another podcast episode probably. But the truth of the matter is if you're hiring a professional transaction coordinator, they probably have better processes than you anyway. And so you're actually going to enhance that experience. But it is realizing that there's somebody who can do it better, letting, in some cases, ego, in some cases, just fear,
100%.
Pull it out of the way and give it to somebody else to do. Define what success looks like for them, and then measure it and just see how it goes and give feedback and let that process consistently improve, right?
Yeah, it is. And the TC thing is a good way to marry just project management in general, right?
It is.
Because most people, regardless of industry, the biggest excuse or thing that stops them from trying something different is a fear-based thing, or we don't like the change, or how is this going to affect me, my business, my clients, what have you. And it's no different than if you're talking about it internally.
Right.
You're going, what's going to affect my part of this, or what have you? Are these going to be fluid? Are they going to be cohesive? And you have to be able to release and just be able to analyze it and go, okay, I need to tweak this, or I've got to adjust here, or maybe we can work together to adjust this. And that is going to be your biggest, from the delegation piece, getting to a happy marriage of a product at the end, is working together and expectations.
Yep.
Expectations is going to be the biggest piece of it. You and I do it all the time, where we bounce things back and forth and make sure that we're on the same page. It's no different from a realtor to a TC. You're explaining, hey, they are going to be the ones that are taking care of this for you. But if you don't tell them, then there's that odd situation.
Yeah, it's about communicating the right way. Okay, shifting gears a little bit here. So let's go back to my to-do list that has 37 things on it that are all 40 to 80% done, 70% done, whatever, right? How do you prioritize what needs to be done now without, and I think this is the key, letting recency bias really play a big part, which is hard because that idea I had in the shower this morning was awesome and we need to do it right this second.
So I think for me, I look at this in two different ways. Is what task can make the greatest effect on the company or my business or whichever in the fastest manner if I get it completed.
Right.
So which one provides an immediate ROI? That is for me one level of how to prioritize. And then the other one that you really can is which of these can I get done the quickest and implemented, so then I can dive further into other pieces or other projects. And the only reason I say that I like to look at it from both of those angles is sometimes we have 37 things on a list or what have you, and the number of them begins to overwhelm just the thought of doing it. And then you get into the 60, 70% done, and then you move on to the next, where if you sit down and you go, hey, you know what? I could get both of those done by Friday. They'd be off my list. Then I'd be like lower 30s. It gives you a sense of like accomplishment. It gives you some confidence that's built up. And when you get that going, it helps propel you into the next areas. Yeah. So if you can get certain things off your plate, it allows you to focus more on certain pieces instead of all the pieces.
Gotcha.
And then the back end of that is you have to pay attention to the ones that can either help the bottom dollar or can make time more useful. And that's your other prioritizing pieces that you can't ignore.
I heard a great term the other day. Instead of return on investment, return on energy.
There you go.
Because there are some things that you do and you know you're not going to get a real investment from a dollar standpoint back, but was it just worth your effort and time and sometimes mental energy, liver function, whatever that looks like, right? One of the things that has always worked for me, and it's 2025. So this is a 14-year-old going on trick now that Tom Ferry taught me in 2011, I think, or 2012. So shout out Tom Ferry. He showed me how to do a doing done board, which is like the most simple thing ever. But the way that it helps me prioritize was actually like the secret weapon of the doing done board. So for those of y'all who don't know doing done board, really quickly, it's you have your to-do list. You are able to take two things from your to-do list and put them in the doing section. Okay. And you're not allowed to touch the to-do list until those two things are moved over to the done section. Right? So you have to complete those two items. You can only focus on those two items. Once you're done with them, you go back to your to-do list and you pick the next two. So the secret of that for me, like kudos, you're getting shit done, right? Like the doing stuff actually makes its way over to the done section. Awesome. But what really happens is when you get back to the to-do list, was that thing that you thought of in the shower that morning really as important as you thought it was a week or two later once you've gotten something else done? And so it kind of helps you reset the expectations. And sometimes those things go into a one of these days file that we'll get around to that one of these days. Sometimes you realize that, hey, that idea that's down here at the bottom of my to-do list actually would be really helpful now. And so it goes up to the top and gets moved over to the doing. And so for me, just having that, because I'm a very visual person, so having that visually kind of written out list is a big deal for me. Because then I can say, okay, well, this is important, and move those things forward.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I probably don't do it so formally, I guess, maybe with that manner, but that's definitely kind of the way of tackling them.
Yeah, I mean, and the formality, like I've got a whiteboard here in the office that has that on that. I've used Post-it notes before, like and just stuck them on a wall. I keep them in my remarkable, wherever. There's even for those of you who are more digital than me, there's an app called Trello that is essentially a doing done board on your phone, which is pretty cool. My wife and I used to use it for restaurants we wanted to try.
There you go.
That was our Trello app usage. So probably not what the founders of Trello were hoping for from a project management standpoint, but hey, we tried new restaurants because of it.
There you go.
All right. Next up is when we get to the point where we feel like we're about to move something into that done category, what does your review process look like? Or is it a field test? Is it a just go back and look through everything and make sure we've dotted I's and crossed T's? Is it a combo? Like what happens there before we actually go to hit the launch button?
Man, I think really one of the first things is kind of that combo platform. One of the things I love about here that every piece of this company that I've ever been involved in is it's a good sounding board with other people and having people that are around you that you trust and you kind of want to hear their thoughts on something. So for me, I think we do a lot of stuff where we put things into play, ask a little bit, do a little trial by fire, make sure we feel comfortable with it if we need tweaks before we get into the final elements of it. So I think having like a review team or having some form
of a little beta test group or whatever that looks like. Yeah.
That you can really pitch the scenarios off of, because even one little thing that you may not be thinking of could completely propel a project from being good to great. Yeah. And it's really one of those that sharing of the minds is huge. And I think that's one of the things that I really enjoy about being around here is we've always had good teams for that stuff.
I agree. One of the things that we always try to look at is like, I have my ideas of the way things should be done, but those are based off of my experience, right? And my past whatever. And yours is different. And I mean, if I was shooting this podcast right now and you weren't in the room, I would probably have to shoot it 3 times because you've helped set up all the cameras, but because you have that past experience. But everybody kind of brings that rounded look to things, and somebody who grew up in a certain background or is a different culture or whatever, their weight of what their experiences are. When you can put that all together, what you end up with is a far more well-rounded end product.
For sure.
That can speak to a number of different people, no matter really what that looks like, right? Okay, so I think maybe one of the last things here as we kind of wrap this up is whether you call it a debrief, an after action report, or whatever that looks like, is How did it work once you launched it? And then what happens?
The biggest thing that I'm going to say, and like your business coach, we talked to him a lot about this stuff, but you got to be able to take some criticism from really whoever you have involved, and you got to be open-minded to it, because if you walk into it just being a brick wall, you're not going to allow whatever it is you're working on to get to its greatest element of success. And so you've got to be able to come back, look at it realistically, and go, we got some gaps here. How can we make this better? Or how can we improve this? And so taking criticism, and then as well as really looking at a project in general and rethinking it now that you've seen something, you got to, I hate to use the corny term, but get outside the box a little bit and make sure that you've looked at it from a bunch of different angles. It's no different than like this right here, where you've got multiple angles. Like, you've got to look at it that way.
Well, and you know, I talk about this all the time. It's actually one of our core beliefs here at CB&A is challenge traditional thinking. Mm-hmm. And that in part comes because I think that the real estate industry in particular, there is this we've always done it that way mentality. And so when you look at it from all these different angles, can you look at it from somebody outside your industry that has some level of correlation, and innovate based off of things that other industries have done? And I think there's plenty of room for that in a service-based industry. Product is maybe a little bit different, but in a service-based industry like we're in, I think there's plenty of room to steal from other people outside of our industry and make it better. I'm looking at it right now. There's a book over your shoulder called Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. And one of the things that they talk about is the power of the debrief, and how oftentimes when they were on missions, because they were both Navy SEALs, if you don't know the book, when they were on missions, they would spend more time actually debriefing what they just did than they did planning ahead. And so I think that I think it's often overlooked because it's easy to overlook. But I think the power of coming back and saying, okay, how did that event go? Or I just tried this in a listing agreement or a listing appointment. Did it work? And what happened in that listing appointment? We have an agent, one of our managers down on the south side of Houston, who I think is one of the best there is at debriefing. And he does it in a way so that his approach is, can I answer the question that's going to come up next time before it even gets asked, based off what I've seen in past listing appointments or buyer consults or whatever that looks like. So he's trying to use it to be proactive, to improve the process. And I think that that's super important. Like, I don't think it gets done enough because, again, it's easy to skip. But if we're honest with ourselves, I think anytime we try out something new, or we've built a new system, we've built a new process, we're changing a different script or something like that, going back and looking at the results of it, not just in the immediate, but maybe 30 days later after we've tried it 3 or 4 or 5 times. Because I also think one of the things that we do terribly in this industry, and I have a long list, but I think one of the things we do terribly in this industry is we just go try something without really practicing it and making it ours and stuff. And then when it doesn't work, we're like, oh, this sucks. I'm never doing this again. When really it's us that probably sucks. And so I think the debrief is a super powerful piece of that project management element. When you look at it from, I've planned, I've defined what success looks like, I think, in the beginning. I've reverse engineered the steps I need to take to get there. I've actually gotten there. And now I've had a few people look at it. They think it's good. I try it out. If we stop there, I mean, it could just be falling on deaf ears. For sure. There's the old story, of Febreze. Have you ever heard the founding of Febreze? So Febreze was never intended to be Febreze, like we know it now, right? It was just intended to be sort of a cleaning product that was out there, that would help the house smell good. And they put it through all the tests that a big company, I think Procter & Gamble owns Febreze, I'm not sure. Don't sue me if they don't, Procter & Gamble. They put it through all the tests. They launched it, and it fell super flat. And then they just changed the marketing a little bit to speak to what it actually does. And when they did that, boom, took off. Nobody cared about the cleanliness piece of it. They cared about the smell part of it. And they had to commercials where they're covering up a dog, they're covering up, whatever. And as soon as it did that, now it's synonymous with air freshener. You can just Febreze something. And so I think that if they had never done that and they had just kept plodding along, we would probably not use Febreze in vernacular like we do today. So their ability to go back, realize that there was a problem, and then redo it, change the way and change their bottom line forever. So I think that if we look at it from a project management standpoint, that going back through and doing the review at the end is super important.
I don't disagree. We do it pretty much in everything here. And it's something that has allowed us to grow and develop a lot of different pieces.
Yeah.
And if you don't have it, what are you really analyzing, I guess?
Right. What else are we missing here when it comes to keys to getting things done? Oh, I know what we need to talk about. Let's talk about distractions. So I'm going to brag on Trevin for a second here. Trevin is one of the better people I know at actually putting walls up when he's working and not getting distracted, because I will be the first to tell you, like, phone rings, text message comes through. Even if I have my ringer off, but I can see it, I need to throw my phone across the room when I'm actually trying to focus in on something. And I shut down my email, but how do you minimize distractions while you're focused on a certain thing?
So, total honesty, I haven't been great at this forever. I used to be chasing squirrels and stuff all over Timbuktu, and it got to the point where I had my list of 40 things that never got done. And it created frustration, and so much that I had to kind of look at myself a little bit and have some hard conversations in the mirror. And now guilty as charged. Somebody can be in my ear talking and I will be so hyper focused on stuff, and it's really bad. I even unfortunately take it kind of home with me in certain ways. So Amber, I'm sorry. But you have to ignore the noise. Yeah. And stay in where you're at, because if you don't, especially if you're an active-minded person, you can end up in the shower when you're not in the shower.
Right. Yeah.
And so for me, I had to really, number one, understand me and how I'm wired, because if I don't be real disciplined, I literally could be out in that parking lot picking up acorns or something when I'm supposed to be working on spreadsheets. Right. And you have to stay laser focused. And the best way I know to tell anybody to do this is, it sounds so corny in this industry, but you got to time block stuff or separate stuff. I
mean, I think that's the key. And even if it's there's this new trend in time management, the Pomodoro system or whatever, where you're only working for 20 or 25 minutes, whatever that looks like, it doesn't matter. But I do think if I'm going to set aside, and it doesn't have to be 4 hours, right? Set aside half an hour, set aside 45 minutes. Listen, there is nothing going on in your life that you can't turn your phone off for 30 minutes.
For sure.
Or 45 minutes, or shut your email down for 30, 45 minutes. Just do that and then walk away for 10 minutes. Answer calls, return emails, check your Facebook or whatever you need to do, and then go back to work.
I think the biggest thing with that too is you could listen to a million different motivational speakers, right? And they may have 50 different ways of how to do that. You really have to identify what is best for you. You may have a 30-minute attention span where I have an hour attention span, and that's cool. But be honest about that and attack that 30 minutes in the absolute best manner that you possibly can, and then separate and then come back and do it again and replicate. So you have really efficient use of the time that you're putting into it, instead of putting 2 hours and you get 20 minutes of real activity out of it.
Right.
And so I think it again boils down to understanding you and what your strengths are in that.
I think that's super important, because I think we tend to, a 5 a.m. club, cool. Listen, personally, there is never a time that I'm going to be in the 5 a.m. club, unless I have to catch an airplane or unless I'm still up. That's when I'm going to see 5 a.m. because I'm just not a morning person. But I'll email you at 2 a.m. Last night I emailed you at 2 a.m. I don't think it was that late, but it was late. You have to do what works for you and make it work. But the key is you have to make it work.
For sure.
There's no one else who can do it.
Yep.
Right. And there's no book or anything. You just have to say, okay, I have 30 minutes in me. Shut it down, do only the thing you're doing for 30 minutes. And every time, this is going to show that like how hard this is for me to believe, because I've been doing it for a long time. But every time I do it, I'm like, damn, I'm able to get a lot of stuff done when I actually just work, right? Like, it's kind of dumb.
Yeah, I'll say, especially in this industry, your email and your cell phone are your worst enemy.
Yeah, for sure.
And we were talking about it yesterday, ironically, but the 7 levels of communication book. In the book, the coach talks about turn your freaking phone over for an hour. It's not going to kill you.
It's not.
And go do this, and you'll be shocked
How much you can accomplish.
Yeah. So if you can just do that incrementally over the day, and then you do that over your week, and so like it's astronomical when it builds up.
It is. It's that, compound effect, right?
Yep. 100%.
Cool. Anything else we need to share on project management and getting shit done? I can't think of it. I think it's pretty good.
Yeah.
If you're not
Just
good at
get
getting
started.
things done and you haven't listened to this, like this is going to give you some good pointers. All right, you ready? Speed round.
All right.
4 questions, top of your mind, what it comes up first. Your favorite business book. You might have already mentioned it.
I have 2 right now, I would be honest, which is 7 Levels of Communication. And then I really, really like Unreasonable Hospitality.
Yeah, it's great.
It really, really is.
It's great. All right, your favorite tech tool or tech toy, thing you like to play around with the most or use the most? The Remarkable?
The Remarkable, hands down. It's the greatest thing I've had.
The Remarkable just confounds me, right? Because it's such a simple tool, but it's so good. It's like if I had to leave home without my laptop, but I had my Remarkable, I would probably be okay with it. I don't think I would swap my Remarkable for phone, but I would probably be okay with just taking my Remarkable because it's such a good product.
100%.
All right, outside of this one, obviously, what's your favorite podcast?
Ooh, man. I enjoy Josh Smith with Get Shit Done.
How appropriate.
I like the just straight to the point, the realistic, not the beat around the bush. So I do enjoy his.
All right. And the best piece of advice you've ever gotten?
Ooh.
Doesn't matter if it's business or personal or anything else.
I'm gonna throw one to my dad a bone on this one. The 2 things that he told me, which funny enough correlate into real estate at the end of it is there's 2 things that they don't make any more time of, and that's time and it's land.
Yeah, there you go.
And so capitalize off both of them.
Perfect. Wow. That is how you end a real estate podcast right there, kids, especially when it comes to project management and real estate. So, Trevin, thanks for being with us on the Standard. Appreciate it. Thank you for watching and listening. Subscribe, share. We appreciate it. And we will see you next time.